My first book, when I wrote it, I called it Soul Path. And I called it Soul Path because the most effective people, happily effective, I mean, sometimes people are very effective, but they do it by creating such a rigid structure in their life that there's not much room for joy. But the happily effective people I met didn't seem to so much be good at reaching their goals as they were following a path that almost seemed like it was laid out for them, where they just kind of did the next thing, and then the next thing would become available. And then they do that, and then the next thing would become available. And it was almost like their soul was laying the path out in front of them, one flagstone at a time, one yellow brick at a time. And when I look at the lives of the people that we consider the great geniuses, I remember one of my favorite books in my early 20s was called The Big Book of Genius by Tony Buzan. And he actually categorized, I think it was the top 50 geniuses in the history of time, and had all these different distinctions about what made them geniuses and why they were so brilliant. And his conclusion, and it is a very common cultural conclusion, is that some people are just born different. And while you can maybe aspire to that kind of genius, you either are born with it or you're not. Now, while that isn't an unreasonable conclusion to come to from that data, it's not the conclusion that I've come to over the years. As I've worked both with high performers in a number of fields, but also with people who struggle, who find that coping is the bar that they're trying to get over, not thriving, not creating, not genius. It doesn't look to me like there is a fundamental difference in capacity. Now, sometimes physically there might be. There are biological differences between people, and sometimes those biological differences, I know the example that used to get used all the time was, hey, somebody who's 5'7" is never going to dunk a basketball, but then 2 or 3 players, Spud Webb being the first one I remember, came along who were 5'7" and could dunk basketballs, and was like, okay, scratch that. But fundamentally, genius is a function of spirit, not brain. Or you could say it's a function of the mind, the universal mind, not the individual brain. And so, yeah, if the individual brain isn't functional, then there's kind of it's like a broken radio. There's no way for that signal of universal genius to come through. But for most people, it's not a case that it can't come through. It's a case that for whatever reason, they're almost never tuned into that station. They're tuned into the golden oldies and always thinking about what's happened in the past. They're tuned into the best of, where they just keep thinking the same thoughts over and over and over again. And they might be pleasant thoughts or they might be unpleasant thoughts, but they're the same thoughts. But the second anyone tunes in to that genius signal, to that deeper intelligence that is impersonal, but comes through each of us as genius, they are tapping into the very same origin point, the very same source as a Mozart, as a Beethoven, as a Da Vinci, as an Einstein, as a Marie Curie, as anyone who has not just allowed themselves to be attuned or lucked into being attuned to that deeper signal, what I would have called their soul path, the signal from the soul. And it's just the rest is craft. The rest is time. You can be tuned into that signal, and if you have no musical craft, it will take you a little while to learn that craft. But once you do, once you have a language to express it in, you can express it beautifully. As a painter, if you have no craft, if you've never done it, it may take some time to develop the craft. But the place from which your work can come is the exact same place as the origin of the great art of our time. And this is one of those things where if you try to take it on as a belief, an affirmation, I have genius. Look, maybe it will help. Usually when I tried stuff like that, what came back is, no, you're not. And it never really took. But if you look, you will find moments in your own life where you've just known. Now, they may seem few and far between, but those moments of just natural creativity, natural flow, following that knowing, that's what's behind all great genius as it's expressed in the world. And in a way, if you keep holding them as different, well, they're geniuses, then it makes sense that it wouldn't really occur to you to spend much time tuned in to WGEN US. I don't know what the call signs would be for it. Whereas if you can see that that same place is available to all of us, but how it gets expressed circumstances will play into that, training will play into that, craft will play into that, support will play into that. But then you can see that that same potential for genius is inside you, as was and is inside them.